Evan adjusted the communicator on his wrist and took a deep breath. The room was bigger than he had expected, a vast, open space filled with species of all shapes and sizes. Floating jelly-like beings hovered near the ceiling, tall crystalline figures refracted light across the walls, and others moved with tentacles, wheels, or limbs that defied human anatomy. For the first time in his life, he felt completely ordinary, and yet somehow important. He had come as a representative of humanity to the Intergalactic Council Station, a place where the galaxy's most advanced species met to discuss trade, diplomacy, and cooperation. To him, it was overwhelming. To the aliens around him, humans were a curiosity. Unlike any other species, humans did not form bonds the way the others did. Some species had chemical reactions, rituals, or even instantaneous connections that created lifelong loyalty. Humans had none of that. Humans were human. The first delegate to approach him was small, no taller than a human child, with scales that shimmered in colors he had never seen. Her eyes were too large, almost exaggerated, and they glowed faintly with a turquoise hue. She hesitated before speaking, and when she did, her voice rang with urgency, high-pitched and trembling. "What is this?" she asked, holding her hands out, displaying a series of pattern markings that humans could not fully interpret. "Why do you resist bonding?" Evan tilted his head, trying to make sense of it. I'm not resisting," he said carefully. "Humans don't bond like that. We make friends, we form relationships, but not instantly. It takes time." Her eyes widened and a flicker of panic passed over her face. "Time," she repeated, as though the word was alien in itself. "You cannot just wait, you are supposed to bond." Evan smiled politely. "I think we have a different idea of what bonding means. Humans choose to connect with someone. We don't have a ritual or chemical that makes it happen automatically." For a moment, the small alien froze, then her body seemed to tremble with frustration. She stepped closer to him, shaking slightly. "But how can you survive? How can you cooperate? How do you trust each other?" "Because we try," Evan said. "Because we want to, that's what makes us human. We can choose, we can risk, and sometimes it hurts, but it also works." She blinked at him, and he could see a mixture of disbelief and desperation in her expression. She turned to the other delegates, waving her arms dramatically. "Do you see this? They do nothing, nothing, and yet they survive. How can this be? What do we need to do to bond with them? Tell me, tell me." The room went quiet. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the human and the alien girl. Some whispered among themselves, others hovered closer to observe. Evan felt all of them studying him, as if he were a puzzle to be solved. He had expected curiosity, but not this level of intensity. One of the taller crystalline beings stepped forward, its voice echoing softly through the chamber. "They choose. They do not require bonding. It is not that they cannot bond. It is that they do not follow our patterns. Their minds are different." Evan nodded. "Exactly. Humans are unpredictable, maybe, but also very good at working together because we choose to, not because we have to." The alien girl let out a frustrated noise, almost a shriek, and dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain herself. "We are trained from birth. Bonding is life, connection is survival. Without it we fail. And yet," she looked up at Evan, eyes wide and glistening, "you live even without this bond. How? Why? What is wrong with you?" Evan crouched slightly, trying to meet her at her level. "Nothing is wrong. We just do it differently. We trust each other in ways that are slower, less obvious, but just as strong. We choose each other. And that choice, it matters more than any ritual." The alien girl's body language softened, but her confusion did not fade. She looked around at the other species, then back at Evan. "But you must have something, a way to connect that we cannot see. A ritual, a sign, a symbol." Evan shook his head. "No, there's nothing to see. We talk, we spend time together, we help each other. Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes we fight, but we stay. That's the bond. We don't need a ceremony or a chemical or an enforced ritual. We just care, and we choose to care. There was a pause. The alien girl looked at him as though he had spoken a foreign language. The other delegates murmured quietly among themselves. Many of them had never encountered a species that bonded purely by choice. It challenged everything they had believed about cooperation and loyalty. The alien girl, whose name he had learned was Kelaris, finally spoke again, quieter this time, almost to herself. You risk everything. You risk pain, rejection, loneliness, and you survive. You survive and even thrive. How can this be? Evan smiled gently. Because humans are stubborn, we try, we take risks. We hurt, we forgive, we try again. We don't have guarantees, but that's what makes us strong. That's how we bond. Kelaris's expression shifted from confusion to amazement. She seemed to struggle with the idea that connection could exist without control or certainty. Her species had evolved to bond instantly, chemically, biologically, for survival. The human method, if it could even be called a method, was completely alien. Yet somehow, it worked. Can I learn this? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I bond like you? Evan hesitated. You don't bond like us by force or by trying. You can learn to understand it, to experience it. But it doesn't work the way your people think. You can spend time together, share experiences, trust each other, but you can't make it happen instantly. That's the human part. She nodded slowly, absorbing the idea, her body still tense. Around them, the other delegates began to discuss quietly, some skeptical, some fascinated. Humanity's presence had disrupted the assumptions of the Council. Other species had expected humans to conform to known bonding mechanisms, and instead, they saw something entirely new. Evan looked at her and said, "You'll see. It's not easy and it's not guaranteed, but it's real and it's strong. The choice to stay with someone, to care for them, that's what makes the bond." Kelaris's eyes glistened, reflecting the soft lights of the chamber. For the first time, she seemed less frantic and more curious, more willing to watch and learn. She leaned forward slightly, as if trying to absorb the human way of thinking. Around them, the council continued, but the focus had shifted. Humans had introduced a new concept, one that could change how species approached friendship, cooperation, and trust. Kelaris was the first to recognize it fully. Humans were dangerous, but not in the way other species expected. They were dangerous because they could choose loyalty, risk pain, and still remain committed. No chemical, no ritual, no biological imperative could enforce it. Humans were free to bond or to walk away, and yet they often chose to stay. Evan straightened and looked around the room. Some of the other delegates were observing him with cautious respect. He realized that in this moment, humans were teaching the galaxy something vital. Connection was not a mechanism, it was a choice. It was a decision made again and again, not imposed from outside. Kelaris spoke again, quieter this time, more to herself than anyone else. You choose every time, and still you stay. How can I even begin to understand this? You start by watching, Evan said softly. You start by being with someone, sharing moments, learning and staying. That's how humans bond. Kelaris nodded, her anxiety slowly melting into fascination. For the first time since she had shouted across the chamber, she seemed calm, curious, and eager. She did not fully understand it yet, but she wanted to. She wanted to see how humans built something stronger than any chemical or ritual, something that could last because it was chosen freely. Evan smiled, feeling a strange mix of pride and hope. Humanity had survived by choice, not by instinct. And now, in this chamber of strange and powerful beings, he could see the galaxy beginning to notice. Humans were unusual, unpredictable, maybe even reckless, but they were capable of a kind of connection that no one else had. Kelaris tilted her head and whispered almost to herself, "I want to learn this human way." And for the first time, in a place filled with beings who understood bonding in only one way, A human and an alien girl both realized that sometimes the greatest connections could not be forced. They had to be discovered, nurtured, and chosen. The room buzzed with whispers, but for Evan and Calaris, the world had narrowed to a single truth. Humanity's way of bonding was unlike anything else in the galaxy, and it was both simple and extraordinary. The chamber had quieted, but the energy lingered. Calaris stood close to Evan, still processing what she had seen. She could not fully understand it yet, but one thing was clear. Humans did not bond like any species she had ever known. She could sense their strength, their patience, and their freedom, and it terrified and fascinated her at the same time. Other delegates had begun discussing quietly among themselves. Many were whispering in languages Evan could not recognize, exchanging notes and gestures. Their consensus was clear. Humanity was an anomaly. Every species had a way to create bonds, whether by ritual, chemical, or biological trigger. Humans had none. And yet, humans survived, cooperated, and even thrived. Calaris tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on Evan. Why do you not bond immediately? Why do you not form connections as we do? How do you survive without it? Evan smiled gently. We bond in a different way. We choose people carefully. It is slower, but it is strong because it is chosen. You cannot force it. You cannot rush it. It grows naturally over time. Her hands trembled. But how can you trust someone without the bond? How can you work together? How can you know they will not abandon you when danger comes? Evan paused, thinking of the countless times humans had worked together, even when they did not have guarantees. We trust because we decide to. We work together because it matters. Humans are willing to risk failure because the reward, the connection, is worth it. It is not guaranteed, but that is what makes it real. Calaris stared at him in silence. Around them, the other delegates seemed to listen more carefully now. Humans had disrupted everything they thought they knew about trust and loyalty. They had expected bonding to be a predictable mechanism, but instead, they were witnessing choice, patience, and risk. A tall, silver-skinned delegate approached, its body reflecting light like polished metal. Its voice was soft but carried authority. You say your species bonds by choice, not by necessity, it asked. And yet you thrive, you survive, you cooperate. This defies logic. Evan nodded. It might seem illogical, but it works. Humans form bonds over shared experiences, shared struggles, and shared moments of care. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it is only a few hours, but it happens naturally because people choose to stay connected. Calaris exhaled, a sound that seemed like a mixture of relief and frustration. This is impossible. How do I even begin to understand it? Evan shrugged slightly. You start small, watch, listen, spend time together. That is how humans bond. She looked at him, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity. And you bond with anyone who chooses to stay, even when it is difficult. Yes, Evan said softly. Even when it is difficult, even when we disagree, even when it hurts. That is what makes it real. That is what makes it strong. Calaris's hands shook slightly. But what if I fail? What if I cannot bond? Evan's smile was gentle. You cannot fail. Bonding is not a test. It is a choice. You try, you share moments, you care. That is all. It cannot be forced and it cannot be rushed. It only grows. The alien girl's eyes reflected a mixture of fear and wonder. She had spent her life learning the rules of bonding, instantaneous, chemical, undeniable. The human method, if it could even be called a method, was completely foreign. Yet somehow, it seemed more powerful than anything she had known. Calaris's attention shifted as she watched a group of humans interacting in a corner of the chamber. They laughed, they gestured, and they shared small moments of understanding. No ritual, no ceremony, no enforced bond, just simple connection through conversation, humor, and attention. Is that bonding? She asked, her voice barely audible. Evan nodded. Yes. That is what humans do. We spend time with people, we listen, we care, we help. That is how the bond grows. Her glowing eyes widened. It is slow. Yes, Evan said. But that is why it is strong. You cannot take it away. It is chosen, not given. It cannot be broken by force, only by choice. And when someone chooses to stay, it means more than anything else. Kelaris's mind spun with the concept. In her species, a failed bond could destroy a life. Here, humans lived freely, choosing connections without certainty, and yet their bonds endured. The idea seemed reckless, yet beautiful. A murmur ran through the chamber as other delegates began discussing the human method among themselves. Some seemed fearful, others curious. Evan could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Humanity had introduced something entirely new, a way to bond that relied on choice rather than compulsion, patience rather than ritual. Kelaris moved closer to Evan. "I want to learn this," she whispered. "I want to understand. I want to bond like humans." Evan looked at her, his expression gentle. "You cannot force it. You cannot make it happen instantly. You can experience it, you can understand it, and you can grow it. But it will take time, and it is your choice." She nodded slowly, her glowing eyes reflecting the light from the chamber. For the first time, she seemed calm, thoughtful, and curious rather than frantic and desperate. She wanted to understand, to try, to see what humans could teach her. Around them, the council continued its discussions, but the focus had shifted. Humanity had disrupted assumptions, challenged expectations, and demonstrated a way of living and connecting that no other species had considered. Kelaris spoke again, her voice quiet, almost to herself. "You risk so much. You risk pain, failure, loneliness, and still you survive. And you bond anyway. How can this be?" Evan smiled. "Because we try, we care, we choose to stay. That is what makes the bond, that is what makes it real." Her glowing eyes softened as she processed his words. She could see it now, even if she did not fully understand it. Humans did not need a ritual to bond. They did not need a chemical. They needed only time, effort, and choice. "I want to try," she whispered again. "I want to understand this human way." Evan nodded. "Then start by being here. Listen, watch, learn, and share moments. That is all it takes." Kelaris smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed almost human. I will try," she said. And so, in a chamber filled with beings from across the galaxy, a human and an alien girl began an experiment without rules, without guarantees, and without rituals. They began the process of learning how to bond through choice, patience, and care. As the day passed, Kelaris observed humans moving through the chamber, interacting with one another in ways that were subtle, small, and yet profound. A shared joke, a helping hand, a look of understanding. These were the acts that created bonds, not chemicals or rituals. She watched and absorbed, trying to grasp the simplicity and the depth of it all. Evan noticed her attention, and he offered small gestures of guidance. A smile here, a question there, a shared observation. He did not rush her, did not force understanding, and did not demand participation. He simply offered presence, patience, and example. By the end of the day, Kelaris was exhausted but exhilarated. Her mind was full of new ideas, new concepts, and new ways of thinking about connection. She realized that humans were not only different, they were extraordinary. She looked at Evan, her glowing eyes reflecting a mix of awe and hope. I think I understand a little," she said. Evan nodded. "It will take time, but you will learn more every day." Around them, the council continued, but for Kelaris, the most important lesson had begun. Humans were capable of connections that no species could force, predict, or control. They chose to stay, to care, and to bond, and that choice made them strong, resilient, and, in a way, dangerous. For the first time, Kelaris understood the power of choice. She understood that bonding was not a rule, a ritual, or a chemical. It was a living, growing thing that required attention, care, and courage. And in that moment, she made her first choice, to try, to learn, and to follow the human way. She did not fully understand it yet, but she wanted to. And that was enough to begin. As the chamber lights dimmed for the evening, Kelara stood beside Evan, ready to observe, ready to learn, and ready to take her first steps toward a bond that could not be forced, only chosen. The galaxy around them buzzed with curiosity, confusion, and awe, but in that quiet moment, one alien girl and one human man shared a simple truth. Connection was a choice, and humans were masters of it in ways no one had imagined. For Kelaris, the journey had begun. For humanity, the lesson was clear. Bonds were not given. They were earned, nurtured, and chosen freely. And that made humans remarkable. The next morning, the chamber was alive with movement and voices, but Kelaris hardly noticed. She was focused on Evan, watching him interact with others. Every gesture, every word, every small act of attention fascinated her. Humans did not have a set ritual to bond, yet somehow, they built trust and friendship through these tiny moments. Kelaris decided to try. She approached Evan hesitantly, unsure what to say or do. I want to understand this better, she said quietly. Her voice still trembled with urgency, though the panic had softened into determination. Teach me, show me. I will try to do what humans do. Evan smiled gently. It's not something you can force, Kelaris. You can observe, participate, and share experiences. That's how humans bond. Kelaris nodded, though she did not fully understand. Sharing experiences seemed too simple for a concept so powerful. In her culture, bonding was a dramatic, irreversible act. How could it possibly grow from ordinary moments? Evan led her through the station, introducing her to other humans. They worked together, solving small problems, sharing tools, and laughing when mistakes happened. Kelaris noticed how humans did not command each other, they offered help and guidance. No one demanded obedience, yet cooperation flowed naturally. See, Evan said, pointing at a small group repairing a broken communication panel, they are not forced, they choose to help. That choice makes the teamwork stronger than any ritual. Kelaris tilted her head, observing closely. She wanted to mimic what she saw, but the humans moved effortlessly, instinctively. She felt awkward, almost invisible. She tried to approach one of the groups, offering to help, but they smiled politely and waved her away. You cannot force it, Evan said softly, noticing her hesitation. You join, you participate, but you do not demand acceptance. Humans decide when to include you, and that decision is what builds trust. Kelaris swallowed hard. Her culture prized instant acceptance and clarity, but this human method required patience. Patience was not something she had been taught to value. And yet, watching Evan, she saw the beauty in it. The human's patience was quiet, consistent, and strong. It created bonds that could survive conflict, distance, or disagreement. Throughout the day, she observed small acts, a human helping another carry supplies, two others laughing over a shared mistake, a quiet conversation between friends. These moments seemed insignificant at first, but slowly, Kelaris began to feel a new understanding. Bonding was not about grand gestures or rituals. It was about presence, attention, and consistency. By the afternoon, she decided to try again. She approached a young human technician who was struggling with a complicated tool. "May I help?" she asked, her voice careful. The technician looked up, surprised, and then smiled warmly. "Of course, that would be great." Together, they worked on the tool. Kelaris watched how the human guided her gently, explaining without criticizing, and how she followed instructions while learning from mistakes. There was no ritual, no chemical signal, no forced connection. And yet she felt something grow, a tiny spark of understanding, of trust, of shared purpose. Evan watched from a distance, proud. Kelaris was beginning to understand. Humans did not require immediate acceptance. They gave each other space and allowed connection to form naturally. That was what made their bond strong. As the day continued, Kelaris joined more humans in small activities. She helped carry supplies, organized tools, and even participated in a friendly game of strategy involving colored lights and tokens. At first, she felt clumsy and out of place, but slowly she began to enjoy the interactions. Humans smiled at her, included her in conversations, and laughed with her when she made mistakes. It was strange. She was not bonded in the traditional sense, yet she felt a connection growing inside her, a warmth she had never experienced with her own species. It was subtle, quiet, and entirely her choice. During a break, she sat beside Evan and asked, "Why do humans not bond immediately? Why must it take so long?" Evan considered this carefully. Because bonding is stronger when it is chosen. When someone decides to stay with you, even after mistakes or disagreements, it shows that the connection is real. It is not imposed. It is earned. That is why it lasts. Kelaris nodded slowly. She understood the words, but the feeling behind them was new. In her species, bonds were permanent and guaranteed. Here, bonds were fragile at first, yet somehow stronger because they could be broken and chosen again. That evening, a small gathering of humans and aliens formed in a common area. Kelaris watched as humans shared stories of past adventures, mistakes, and victories. Each tale was told with humor and honesty. No one judged, no one forced agreement, yet everyone listened, laughed, and supported each other. Kelaris realized that humans bonded through empathy, not obligation. They listened, they shared, and they cared. And the care itself created connections stronger than any chemical or ritual could. She tried to join in, sharing a story from her childhood about a small creature she had befriended on her homeworld. At first, the humans listened politely, exchanging curious glances. Then, one of them laughed softly and asked questions, genuinely interested. Another nodded in understanding. Gradually, more humans leaned in, asking for details, sharing similar experiences from their own lives. Kelaris felt a strange emotion, a combination of relief, pride, and belonging. She had contributed and they had accepted her. Not because of ritual, not because of obligation, but because she had chosen to share herself and they had chosen to listen. Evan approached and whispered, "You see, that is how humans bond. Small moments, shared experiences, and mutual attention. It cannot be rushed and it cannot be forced, but it works." Kelaris nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting understanding. I think I am beginning to understand," she said. "It is different, but it feels real." The humans continued their stories late into the night. Kelaris listened, laughed, and even shared more. She began to feel part of something larger, not through obligation or ritual, but through choice, attention, and care. By the time the gathering ended, Kelaris felt exhaustion, but also a sense of satisfaction. She had taken her first real steps toward understanding the human way of bonding. She realized that it was not about instant connection or guaranteed loyalty. It was about effort, attention, and mutual willingness to stay connected. As she walked beside Evan back to their quarters, she asked, "Will it always feel this, fragile at first? Will it always take so much patience?" Evan smiled. "Yes, and that is what makes it strong. Humans choose to bond every day. Sometimes it is difficult. Sometimes it is uncertain. But the choice to stay, even when it is hard, is what makes the bond last." Kelaris considered this carefully. It was a lesson unlike any she had learned in her own culture. In her species, bonding was instant, permanent, and guaranteed. Here, bonding was a living process, fragile at first, yet stronger because of freedom, effort, and choice. She realized that humans were not only different, they were extraordinary. They could risk pain, loss, and rejection, yet still choose connection. They could fail, make mistakes, and face uncertainty, yet still remain committed. That was power. That was strength. In the quiet of the night, Kelaris thought about the day's experiences. She had shared moments, made mistakes, and been accepted. She had witnessed humans supporting each other without obligation, helping each other without chemical or ritual, and laughing together in moments of failure and success. For the first time, She felt a bond forming, not a bond her culture could recognize, but a human bond. It was subtle, quiet, and entirely voluntary. She could choose to nurture it or walk away, and that choice itself made it meaningful. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the words Evan had said, "Choice makes the bond real." She repeated them to herself, letting their meaning sink in. Humans were not bound by biology, they were bound by intention, by care, by effort, and that made them powerful in ways her species could not imagine. The next day promised more learning, more observation, and more moments of shared experience. Calaris knew the path would not be easy. Patience, effort, and humility were required, but she was ready. She had begun to understand the human way, and she was determined to follow it, step by step. The journey of bonding without ritual had begun, and Calaris, once desperate and frantic, now felt a quiet excitement. She was learning that connection was not a rule to follow, but a living process to experience, and humans had mastered it in ways no other species could. And in that realization, she understood something new. Humans were remarkable, not because they could bond, but because they chose to bond freely, without guarantee, and yet with courage and commitment. The galaxy around them continued its business, unaware that a single human and a single alien girl were beginning a bond that could change the way species understood connection forever. Calaris felt hope for the first time. She had found something extraordinary, a method of bonding that was alive, chosen, and powerful, and she was ready to learn it fully, one moment at a time. The station was quieter than usual that morning, the corridors filled with soft lights and the hum of machinery. Calaris walked alongside Evan, her glowing eyes alert and full of curiosity. Each day brought new lessons, and she was beginning to understand that human bonding was a journey, not an instant result. She could feel the difference between her species, ritualistic bonds, and this human way. It was slower, subtler, and somehow stronger. Evan led her to a training chamber where humans often practiced teamwork exercises. Today, the challenge was simple but required cooperation. A set of panels had to be arranged in a precise sequence, but each panel responded differently depending on the actions of those around it. The humans who entered worked without instructions, adjusting to each other's movements and learning as they went. Calaris observed closely, her small hands folded in front of her. She had learned to watch first before trying to act. The humans communicated through gestures, words, and glances. Each action was a choice, each decision a signal of trust. She had never seen anything like it in her own species. Their bonding was instant, mistakes were rare, and failure was dangerous. Here humans bonded by learning from errors, by adjusting, and by forgiving. "Do you want to try?" Evan asked, glancing at her. Calaris hesitated. She felt nervous, aware of her unfamiliarity with human methods. I am not sure," she admitted. "I do not want to fail." Evan shook his head gently. "You will not fail. Humans bond through trying, through helping, and through sharing. Failure is part of it. The bond grows because of the effort, not despite mistakes." She took a deep breath and nodded. Slowly, she approached a panel. A human with short brown hair smiled at her. "We'll work together," he said simply. "Just follow my lead and we'll figure it out." Calaris's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the first panel. It did not move as she expected, and she nearly made a mistake. The human beside her corrected her calmly, offering guidance without frustration. Another human reached over to help, and together they adjusted the panels until they began to align. She felt a strange warmth. It was not a bond in the chemical sense, but a connection born from effort and cooperation. She was included, accepted, and supported, not because of obligation, but because she participated and the humans chose to work with her. As the exercise continued, Calaris became more confident. She learned to anticipate the human's actions, to communicate with gestures and small words, and to accept corrections gracefully. Each moment created a subtle connection. She laughed when a mistake caused the panels to reset, and the humans laughed with her, not at her. The experience was fun, frustrating, and yet oddly comforting. When the exercise ended successfully, Kelaris felt a small thrill. She had contributed, been accepted, and shared in the success. It was not instant bonding, but it was real. She understood now that human bonds grew through action, trust, and choice. Later, during a break, Kelaris and Evan sat on a bench overlooking the station's observation deck. Stars glimmered outside the transparent walls, distant worlds shining like points of promise. She was silent for a moment, absorbing the lessons of the day. "Do humans always bond like this?" she asked quietly. "Slowly, through effort," Evan nodded. "Yes, it can take days, months, or even years, but that is what makes it strong. Bonds are chosen, not forced. People can walk away, and that makes staying even more meaningful." Kelaris's glowing eyes softened. "It is difficult," she said. "I am used to bonds that are instant, guaranteed, and permanent. This requires patience, understanding, and trust without certainty." "That is why it is powerful," Evan said. "Because you choose to stay even when it is uncertain, because you care enough to make the effort. That is what humans do every day." Kelaris watched him, trying to imagine how she could adopt this way. She had spent her life learning strict rules, instant reactions, and guaranteed outcomes. Here, the human way was unpredictable, flexible, and alive. It required humility and patience, and she had never been trained in either. Yet she felt drawn to it. Over the next hours, Kelaris continued to practice. She helped carry supplies, assisted with technical adjustments, and even joined in casual conversations. Each interaction was a test, a lesson, and a small step toward understanding. She was learning to pay attention, to listen, to anticipate others' needs, and to offer help without expecting immediate recognition or gratitude. During a quiet moment, she noticed two humans arguing softly over a tool. Neither raised their voice, and neither left. They adjusted their plans, explained their reasoning, and found a solution together. Kelaris realized that even disagreement could create connection. Humans were capable of conflict, but they chose to stay and work through it. That choice, she understood, was the essence of human bonding. She joined them hesitantly, offering a small suggestion. The humans smiled and incorporated her idea. For the first time, she felt a small pride in contributing. Her suggestion had value, and the humans accepted it. She understood now that inclusion, respect, and shared effort were the foundation of the bonds she had observed. By the evening, Kelaris felt a subtle but significant change. She no longer approached humans with panic or desperation. Instead, she watched, learned, and acted. She had experienced trust, inclusion, and cooperation without a single enforced bond, and she felt it growing inside her, a quiet, voluntary connection that was hers to nurture or release. Evan noticed the change. "You are doing well," he said. "You are beginning to understand." Humans bond through shared experiences, effort, and choice. "You are practicing all three." Kelaris nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting determination. "I can feel it," she said. "It is different from what I know, but it feels alive. I can understand why it is strong." The station's communal areas were quieter now, but humans continued their routines, laughing, sharing, and helping one another. Kelaris observed a young human child guiding another through a game of logic puzzles. No ritual, no forced bond, just teaching, listening, and patience. She realized that humans created connection in everyday moments, often without noticing it themselves. She joined a small group sharing meals in the dining hall. The food was simple, the conversation casual, yet each exchange was meaningful. Humans asked questions, listened, and responded with care. Kelaris noticed that even small acts, offering a piece of food, complimenting a skill, laughing at a joke, could create trust and warmth. At first, she struggled to contribute. She felt unsure of timing, tone, and manner. But slowly she spoke, shared a story from her homeworld, and listened to others. The humans responded positively, asked questions, and included her in the conversation. Kelaris felt the quiet spark of connection growing stronger. She realized that human bonds were built on moments like these, small, ordinary, yet deliberate. No ceremony, no chemical reaction, no instant ritual, just attention, effort, and care. And yet, those moments created connections stronger than anything she had known. Later, in a quieter corridor, Kelaris paused to reflect. She had spent hours observing, participating, and learning. She had made mistakes, been corrected, and contributed. She had experienced moments of inclusion, trust, and acceptance. And she had chosen to stay, even when she did not fully understand the human method. That choice, she realized, was the most important part. Humans did not bond because they were forced. They bonded because they chose to. Each choice reinforced the bond, making it resilient, meaningful, and enduring. Evan joined her and stood silently for a moment, looking at the distant stars outside the station walls. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Kelaris nodded slowly. I am beginning to. It is not easy. It requires patience, humility, and effort, but it is real. It is strong. I can feel it." "That is all that matters," Evan said. "Understanding will come with time. Experience will strengthen it. You do not need to rush or force it. That is the human way." Kelaris's glowing eyes reflected the faint light of the station. She had begun to grasp the essence of human bonding. It was not about immediate results, guarantees, or perfection. It was about presence, care, patience, and choice. As they walked back to their quarters, she felt a quiet excitement. She had begun to experience what humans experienced every day. She had contributed, shared, and been accepted. She had observed trust, inclusion, and cooperation. And she had chosen to stay, even without certainty or guarantee. For the first time, Kelaris realized that bonding could be voluntary, fragile at first, and yet strong and enduring. She understood that connection was a living thing, nurtured through effort, patience, and care. And she felt a quiet pride in her progress. The next day promised more lessons, more observation, and more opportunities to practice. Kelaris knew that the journey would not be easy. Patience and humility were required, and she was still learning. But she was ready to continue, step by step, moment by moment. And in that quiet resolve, she understood something profound. Humans were remarkable not because they bonded instantly, but because they chose to bond freely without guarantee, and yet with courage and commitment. For Kelaris, the journey of learning human bonding was no longer. The station was quiet that morning, but Kelaris felt a strange energy in the air. It was different from before, not chaotic or confusing, but calm, alive, and full of possibility. She had practiced human-style bonding for days, learning patience, observation, and participation. She had shared meals, helped with work, laughed, and even made mistakes. Slowly, she had begun to understand that humans did not bond through rituals or chemicals, but through choice, care, and effort. Evan approached her as she watched the stars from the observation deck. His calm presence was comforting. "Are you ready?" he asked. Kelaris turned to him, glowing eyes bright with determination. I think so. I understand more now. I have practiced. I have shared moments, learned from mistakes, and chosen to stay." But she paused, unsure how to express what she felt. "Is this enough?" Evan smiled softly. "It is enough for now. The rest comes with time. Humans bond by continuing, by choosing every day. You do not need a single proof. You only need to be present, to care, and to choose to stay. That is the human way." She nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling that was subtle yet powerful. It was not a chemical bond, not a ritual, not an instant connection. It was something she had chosen, and something the humans had returned. That realization filled her with awe. Throughout the day, Kelaris joined the humans in their routines. She helped repair systems, carried supplies, and participated in discussions. She laughed when errors occurred and celebrated small victories with them. Each moment strengthened a quiet connection she could feel growing within her. It was fragile at first, but she nurtured it through attention, care, and patience. Later, she joined a group of humans playing a strategy game that required cooperation and planning. At first, she struggled to understand their methods, but she observed carefully, listened to their explanations, and adjusted her actions. Slowly, she began to anticipate their moves, communicate effectively, and contribute ideas that were accepted and appreciated. She realized something remarkable. Human bonding was not about perfection or instant understanding. It was about effort, patience, and trust. Each small success, each shared experience, each act of care built a stronger connection. And the humans chose to include her, not because of obligation, not because of ritual, but because she had shown willingness and care. During a break, Kelaris and Evan sat together, watching the stars outside the observation deck. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "It is not about force or guarantee. It is about presence, effort, and choice. Humans choose to bond every day, even when it is difficult, even when it is uncertain. That choice makes it strong." Evan nodded. "Exactly. That is what makes human bonds powerful. They are alive. They grow. They survive because people continue to choose each other. That is why humans thrive in ways other species cannot." Kelaris considered his words carefully. She had once thought bonding was a mechanical process, a ritual, or a guarantee. Here she had learned it was a living thing, nurtured by care, patience, and shared effort. She had chosen to participate and she had been accepted. That simple truth was extraordinary. Later in the day, a small crisis arose. A minor system malfunction had left a section of the station without light. Humans immediately coordinated, divided tasks, and worked together to solve the problem. Kelaris joined them, taking responsibility for a critical panel. She hesitated at first, unsure of her actions, but the humans guided her gently. Together, they fixed the system, restoring light to the area. As the lights came back on, Kelaris felt a strong sense of accomplishment. She had contributed, been included, and experienced cooperation firsthand. She realized that bonding was not just about observation. It was about participation, effort, and choice. Humans had shown her that every action, no matter how small, could strengthen connection. Later, she walked with Evan through the communal area. Humans were interacting naturally, sharing laughter, stories, and tasks. Kelaris felt a quiet pride in her growing bond with them. She had learned to be present, to help, to listen, and to contribute. And she had been accepted, not forced, not rushed, not guaranteed. As they approached the observation deck again, Kelaris spoke softly. "Evan, I feel it now. A connection real, strong, even though it is voluntary. I have chosen it, and the humans have chosen it in return. It is different from anything I have known, but it feels right." Evan smiled warmly. "That is the human way. Bonds are alive because they are chosen. They are strong because people continue to care and stay, even when it is uncertain. You are experiencing it exactly as it should be." Kelaris looked out at the stars, letting the understanding settle within her. She realized that human bonds were not fragile. They were strong precisely because they were voluntary. They were flexible, resilient, and alive. And she felt a profound respect for humans, for their courage, and for the way they chose to connect with one another. As night fell, the station's corridors quieted. Kelaris reflected on the journey she had taken over the past days. She had observed, participated, erred, learned, and shared. Each moment had strengthened a bond she could feel quietly growing within her. It was voluntary, uncertain, and fragile at first, but real and powerful. She turned to Evan. "I have one question," she said. Why do humans choose to bond like this? It seems risky, painful at times. Why not have bonds that are instant or guaranteed?" Evan thought for a moment. "Because choice makes it meaningful. Because trust earned is stronger than trust forced. because connections built through effort survive difficulties. Humans bond this way because it is real, alive, and enduring. You do not force it, and that is what makes it powerful. Kelaris nodded slowly. She understood now that strength was not always in immediate perfection or certainty. Strength could be found in effort, patience, and voluntary connection. Humans were remarkable because they embraced uncertainty and risked vulnerability, yet still chose to care, stay, and bond. Over the next hours, Kelaris continued to practice human bonding. She shared stories, helped with tasks, offered ideas, and laughed with others. Each action strengthened her understanding and deepened her connection. She no longer felt panic or desperation, only focus, patience, and quiet joy. By the end of the day, she realized she had experienced something extraordinary. She had shared moments, contributed to group success, and been accepted. She had practiced patience, humility, and care. She had chosen to stay, and humans had chosen her in return. She had learned the power of voluntary bonding, the strength of choice, and the beauty of connection built through effort. Kelaris turned to Evan, glowing softly. "I understand now," she said. "Bonding, it is not instant, it is not guaranteed, it is a living thing. You choose it, nurture it, and it grows. Humans are extraordinary," Evan nodded. "Yes, and now you have experienced it. You have chosen to bond and you have been accepted. That is enough." Kelaris smiled faintly, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had discovered something her species could not teach. The human way of bonding was voluntary, resilient, and alive. It required patience, effort, and courage. It was not guaranteed, yet it was enduring. And she had chosen it. As the station lights dimmed for the night, Kelaris felt a quiet sense of belonging. She was no longer frantic, desperate, or confused. She had begun to understand, to practice, and to nurture human-style connections. And she felt pride, joy, and hope in the strength of the bonds she was forming. She looked around at the humans, seeing how effortlessly they continued their routines, supporting each other, helping and sharing moments. She realized that bonds were built in ordinary acts, listening, laughing, helping, and staying. And she had begun to participate fully, choosing to connect, care, and share herself. For the first time, Kelaris understood the power of voluntary connection. She realized that humans were remarkable not because they bonded instantly, but because they chose to bond freely, without guarantee, and with courage and commitment. And in that understanding, she felt something profound. She belonged. Not because of ritual or obligation, but because she had chosen to stay, to participate, and to care, and because humans had chosen her in return. Evan stood beside her, watching the stars, his expression calm. "You have done well, Kelaris. You have experienced the human way. You have chosen and been chosen. That is the beginning of every bond a human forms." Kelaris nodded, feeling the weight and beauty of the truth. Bonds were not given. They were chosen. They were alive. And humans, in all their unpredictable, flawed, courageous glory, had mastered it. The galaxy continued around them, vast and unaware of the subtle revolution in understanding happening in one small corner of a distant station. But Kelaris did not need the galaxy's approval. She had learned what mattered most. Humans bonded through choice, patience, and care, and she had begun to experience it fully. For the first time in her life, Kelaris felt the quiet certainty of belonging. She had chosen to stay, to participate, and to care. And in return, humans had chosen her. It was fragile, living, and voluntary, but it was real, and it was extraordinary. The station lights dimmed, the stars outside twinkled, and Kelaris stood with Evan, ready to continue her journey. She understood now. Connection was not a rule, a ritual, or a chemical. It was a living thing, nurtured by choice, care, and effort. And in that knowledge, she felt a sense of wonder and hope unlike anything she had ever known. Humans had taught her the greatest lesson. To bond freely, to choose, and to nurture connection was the strongest power of all. And she would carry that lesson with her forever, overwhelming. It was an adventure. Each moment, each shared experience, each act of cooperation and care was a step toward understanding a method of connection unlike any she had known. The station continued its rhythms, unaware that a single human and a single alien girl were quietly demonstrating a new way to bond, one built on choice, patience, and attention. Kelaris felt a quiet joy. She had learned that connection was not imposed, not instant, and not guaranteed. It was alive, fragile at first, and strengthened by choice. And she was ready to continue nurturing it, step by step, like humans had taught her. By the end of the day, she realized that she no longer feared the slow growth of connection. She had experienced the first true moments of human bonding, and she was eager for more. And for the first time, she felt that she could truly belong, not because of ritual or obligation, but because she had chosen to stay.